Hold the Line with Mike Solon is brought to you by the Seattle Police Officers Guild, Seattle's public safety voice.
And so I get people all the time saying, don't dive in the mud with the likes of, NTK. And I'm like, hell no, I am absolutely going to get in the mud.
The line must be drawn here. This far, no farther. This is where we hold them. This is where we fight.
We will not go quietly into the night. We will not vanish. Gotta fight.
Hey, welcome back to Hold the Line with Mike Solon. In studio today, I've got a very special guest that I alluded to in the last podcast we launched. I have Brandi Kruse here, and she's going to explore a lot of public safety questions and answers, and we'll go down that path. But stay tuned. Let's get into it. How you doing?
Good to see you. Good to be here. I walked in. You guys have an espresso machine
We
here?
do have an espresso,
So
courtesy of the members that
fancy.
pay into this.
Oh, thank you, members.
Absolutely. So, when I took office here, I was like, we need this place more welcoming. And so, obviously, after the fire bombs and all that, and I was like, well, we need a safer environment too. So we get this crazy fence structure around our place just to protect it. But I was like, we need more people around here. And to entice them, we just decided to roll out some more food and coffee and create an atmosphere where they feel they can relax.
Yeah, there's some couches and a TV that weren't there last time I was here. The fence is new, but I knew it had gone up when people try to burn your building down.
Yeah.
It's usually good to take some extra security measures.
You came here when you were with Q13. I think even during all the unrest in 2020, we did that special on all the minority officers that are part of the union here that were getting probably the worst abuse of anybody on those lines. So, and I think that was credit to you. We'll put a link in the description in this, but I think you were really the only local journalist that was able to kind of capture that conversation. And I was just curious as to, and that's what I admired about you, that you were willing to get into that mix when nobody else had the courage to do it.
Well, it seemed like, and that was one of my favorite stories that we did during that whole craziness throughout the summer of 2020, because here you had these black officers who had strong opinions on obviously what was happening to them out on the line, but also uniform off as black Americans about what was happening in our country. And so one of the nice things about the platform I had at Q13, now Fox 13, and the show The Divide on Sundays is I think we aired like 25 minutes of that interview for people to see, which really took you inside the horrible abuse these black officers suffered at the hands of white protesters, who said that they were there for racial justice, which just makes no sense, and some of the things said to them. But then also it showed this really personal side of how they, as black Americans, were struggling with their profession and what had happened to George Floyd. Sure. And so, that whole summer, and I know we'll get into it more, it was kind of the beginning of the end for me in this transition from mainstream media, straightforward journalism, to what I do now, into opinion, because the coverage, I would say as a whole, of the media in Seattle was so one-sided. And the things that they were refusing to talk about that were happening, the fire bombs and trying to lock officers inside the East Precinct, the refusal to treat those as egregious acts was stunning to me.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a point as to, I was going to talk about this later on, but I think it's appropriate. It's like we still haven't had any elected official that is still in office from those times as well that have condemned that.
Yeah.
Not one.
Well, and then I loved how you fast forward a couple months, and people know my politics now because I don't do journalism anymore, and I'm the first to admit that. I do political opinion. I still do interviews that are journalistic in nature.
But I would say that you are a journalist. You know what I mean?
At my heart, at the core,
right.
I spent 12 years as a journalist, and I still guide myself by journalistic ethics when it comes to being factual, correcting errors, wanting to get and gather information, but then I give my opinion about it. So I always want to make sure people realize that, yes, I'm a journalist at the core, but I am giving my opinion, and that's something we don't want folks in mainstream media to do.
Yeah.
But, during that whole summer and what happened at Chaz Chop and all of that, it was just stunning to me. The lack of coverage and the lack of criticality and the lack of a backbone for elected leaders to speak up about it. What I kind of laughed at it. I was saying earlier, people know what my politics are. I'm a moderate independent, which is essentially right-wing in Seattle, apparently.
Yeah.
I get called right-wing like every day. But, I have planning to, I have a split ticket voting in November. There's a couple Democrats who I plan to vote for. And so it was just funny to me how after the Chaz Chop happened and after the, cementing of the door of the East Precinct and an attempt to light it on fire, you had this silence, right? And then January 6th happened. And I think January 6th was a national embarrassment. And I covered January 6th with the same vigor that I covered the riots and the unrest in Seattle. Because to me, I don't care what you're there protesting or rioting for. If you assaulted a cop, you belong in federal prison, in my opinion. If you committed acts of violence or vandalism, you belong in prison. And so it was interesting to me how, the left exploded over January 6th, as every American should have been deeply disturbed by it. And then they would get angry at you if you dared point back to what happened in Seattle and said, but why didn't you say anything about this?
Absolutely.
They were like, that's whataboutism. It's like, no, I want you to be morally consistent. I'm not trying to say that January 6th was worse or not worse than what happened in Seattle, but the fact that you were silent about violence and vandalism for a period of 4 months, if not a little longer, and then for political reasons, you want to be angry about this. That's the kind of stuff that really gets me.
Yeah, I appreciate you highlighting that, because I think what it tells you, what it shows, is that partisan politics is in every form of our life now.
Yeah, and that's why we
every
have
aspect of it.
Every aspect. And we have 3 tenets on Undivided, which is the podcast that I host now. People before party, that's an easy one. Ideas before identity. That means I don't care what you look like. I don't care what your sexual orientation is.
Sure.
I don't care the color of your skin. If you have a good idea, bring it to the table. And then the most important one is actions before affiliation. And that's when you decide, I'm going to set my moral compass and I'm going to stay the course. And I'm going to judge someone based on their words and their actions without care or consideration for their political affiliation. That's how I guide myself. And also, you'll find that it becomes really easy. When you always judge someone based on their actions and based on your moral compass and whether you think those actions are right or wrong, you never have to go back and you'll never contradict yourself. Because like January 6th, for instance, when I was speaking out in 2021 about everything that happened in Seattle during the riots, people would be like, well, what about January 6th? You never said anything. And I'd send them 4 or 5 blistering commentaries I did about January 6th, and I would say, I'm morally consistent, are you? It's like, you know this in policing, it's like when you tell a lie, it's impossible to keep your lies straight.
Right.
But if you always tell the truth, it's very easy to keep your story straight. And I think it's the same thing with morality. If you just totally disregard people's politics and you judge them for their character and their actions, life becomes 10 times easier.
Well, there you go. And that's the moderate approach that I think that we desperately need.
Yeah.
We're way too partisan. We're on 2 different sides of the camps. But the fact that, they'll throw shade at the January 6th conversation, but yet not acknowledge the far left Antifa, violence that impacted our nation. Got people killed. To me, that exemplifies how just hypocritical this conversation when people go to both camps, right? And I think you've done a great job. So you had The Divide, which was a really interesting show.
Yeah.
You're already apt to just gravitate towards the acknowledgement that we have this divide. But why did you change it to, once you left local media, why'd you change it to the Undivided? Was there a contract or a copyright issue?
So I didn't get sued.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm sure. Even though, The Divide was my brainchild. It was something that I came to management with at Fox 13 during the 2016 presidential election, because I saw, like many Americans, this path we were going down of just complete unhinged division and just digging into our political factions. And so it was a little segment at first on social media. It then went into the newscast, and then it became a Sunday morning political program in 2019. And, The Divide was about bridging political divides and looking for even little slivers of common sense. And so when I left, I believed in that show so much. And I believed in the mission of the show, which made it very hard to walk away from what I was doing. And so I knew I wanted to keep it something similar, not only for brand recognition, but because that was the mission that I'd started in 2016 that I wanted to continue. So I just tweaked the name to not get sued. But also,
Smart.
I like Undivided better. The divide
that's your
is
mission,
the problem.
right?
Undivided is the mission.
Yeah, that's what you're trying to accomplish, to get people together.
Yeah, so
and you had your 3 mission statements with the
Right.
Undivided that
Exactly.
you just brought in, and they all sound very moderate.
Yeah, but don't get me wrong. People who were fans of The Divide will notice a big shift in the way that Undivided works. And that is one that I include more opinion. I mean, I had a commentary I would end the divide with, but it was always like, try not to ruffle too many feathers. We ruffle feathers. And what I call Undivided now is political commentary for the anti-fringe. And what I've dedicated myself to is an aggressive rejection of fringe ideologies. Because I just feel like, and this is something you've spoke to over the years, the middle has been, and reasonable people have been scared into silence. Because it's terrifying in this city, I found, to speak up. They'll call you racist, they'll call you sexist, they'll call you classist, they'll tell you hate homeless people, that you're a NIMBY.
Sure.
And for an average person who cares about the city, but isn't used to the hate that you and I are used to as an inherent part of our job, that is a really difficult proposition to face. The proposition of being labeled and vilified, of someone calling your employer, of someone doxing you on social media. And so I think the result of that is people just staying quiet and saying it's not worth it to speak up. And so what I've said is, you know what, I'm going to be hated anyway. And so I'm going to speak up, and I'm going to speak up aggressively, and I'm going to be just as loud or louder than those fringe voices that have taken over the conversation.
And
I will
that
own
shows
it, and
courage.
I will fight. I will fight. And it's funny because I
Brandi
get texts.
Kruse. This is why she's leading from the front.
This is also why I'm like aging very rapidly, because it's stressful. Yeah. And I got, just yesterday, there was, as there always is, the angry Twitterati, Seattle Twitterati coming after me for
fantastic.
Just crazy reasons. And I'll get my rationally thinking friends who won't say anything on social media because they're functioning adults and they don't want any part of that. Yeah. But they'll text me and say, how do you deal with it? I don't know how, are you okay? Is the text I get all the time. I'll be like, oh, I'm great. And I had a friend, I worked with this person at Fox 13, and I won't say who it is because I'm not going to bring her into the conversation. But, she said, how do you deal with it? And I said, I just remember that I have wonderful friends like you who know exactly who I am. And then it doesn't bother me. And that's the truth, is that the people who I care about know who I am. They know my character. And so I weigh that against people on Twitter who think they know who I am, and it doesn't even compete.
Yeah, I mean, therefore, you've taken the moral high ground.
Yeah.
Because you believe in it so much. Therefore, that stuff doesn't really impact you. In fact, you use it. I do. I'm not going to speak for you. I'm sorry. I use it for my energy.
Oh, yeah.
I really do. I was like, I find it fascinating. And I swallow it in, but there's been some rough moments. I got to be honest with you. It's not great when you're trying to lead by example, and then you got people just completely throwing shade.
Right, and you have a job to do as well that you're bound by. You can't, just as an example, and I don't know if I have any specific ones that come to mind, but you might have, people hating on an officer for something they did, and your job is the president of the union.
I try to protect them.
And you do have an obligation in that role to offer them counsel, to protect them in a certain sense. And so I think people confuse that and think you're just going to join them in their pile-on hatred of this officer when you have a job to do. Yeah. And so I think that's part of it as well.
Yeah, you brought up a good point, and I think that what that gets to, and I like the way this conversation is evolving here, we have to be reasonable as a union. And I think that's the unreasonable people and that have painted us as being just complete lunatics that will just cover up for bad cops. That's not really the case. But they don't want to talk about that. We have checks and balances here when somebody gets into trouble, per se, and the civilian-led accountability system does their job and holds the officer accountable, and the chief either agrees or disagrees. More often than not, agrees with civilian-led OPA. It's very difficult for them to overturn a civilian OPA decision. But our checks and balances within the union, if somebody wants to appeal that decision, well, they have to approach the board of directors here and then state their case. And it's our board determines, looking at the case file, the politics behind it, what was missed, and we determine whether or not that appeal needs to be approved. And more often than not, we're moderate, very reasonable, because we can't come across as being unreasonable and always appealing things when they've, on its face, violated policy that could violate public trust.
Yeah.
Because we're police officers, we're professionals. What we do feel is that the system here, more often than not, is stacked against the officer in terms of the accountability conversation. And I'm proud to say that in the past 2 years, we've had a 70% drop in discipline appeals from this union because the civilian director at the time was reasonable. Mm-hmm. and we could work with them and say, well, okay, they did a thorough investigation, and your case doesn't warrant the affirmation of an appeal, right?
You did it, you know?
Yeah, exactly. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I think that gets to the conversation. I've noticed lately, and I love it, maybe I missed it, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're using reasonable and unreasonable language, and I've been using that for a while, and I think that really captures what we're up against, what society's up against. You want to just expand on that? Why those two words? Why are they important?
Well, maybe I stole it from you subconsciously. I don't know. But for me, it's what I realized over the years in doing this mission of mine, which I called to give common sense a comeback. And I know people's definition of common sense is different, but we all know who we're talking about. We all know who has sense and who's reasonable. What I've realized over the years, and I have friends from Shama Sawant supporters to Trump supporters across the political spectrum. Friends who I love them all. I've been able to have reasonable conversations with them all about politics, and I'm not a supporter of Donald Trump. I've been very vocal about that. I think it's clear I'm not a supporter of Shama Sawant, although she and I always have pleasant interactions. We've chatted about her love of her dogs and mundane stuff like that. And so I know that might surprise people, but I've always enjoyed our conversations. And so what I've realized is that we have this huge divisive society we're living in that gets worse and worse by the day, but it's not a divide between Democrats and Republicans, as some people would have you believe. It's a divide between the reasonable and unreasonable, because there are common sense individuals across the political spectrum. What I always try to remind myself is people arrive at their political beliefs based on a collection of life experiences. And I think most people arrive at their political beliefs in an honest way. And there are people who, if you sit down and you talk to them, they might be total flip side of you. But if you hear their story, you can kind of understand, okay, here's where they came from. And they'll listen, here's how I got to this point. And so when I talk about common sense, I don't think there's a party that has the market cornered on common sense. And I think you can be reasonable and support what some people would consider fringe policies, but come from an honest place in that support and be willing to really consider and weigh the pros and cons and the consequences of those policies. I'll use police defunding as an example. I would love to get to a point where we could defund the police department. Great. You show me that society that exists where we can take money from our police department, because it's not Seattle. And so if in a perfect world, a utopia, would I support police defunding? Yeah, if you show me a society where there's no rapes and there's no murders and there's not widespread property damage, that's great. And I've talked to people who support police defunding but realize that now is not the time, that we're not in a position and they haven't done the work from the bottom up to revamp a system that can reduce crime rates. So that's a reasonable person to me who's willing to have that conversation.
Acknowledge that
we're not there yet, right?
No, that's good.
And so I think when you take away this Republican versus Democrat and you look at it as reasonable versus unreasonable, I think it takes away the division and gives people an opportunity to sort of just talk to each other like real humans.
That's a great explanation of using those two words. In essence, it captures the undivided, doesn't it?
Yeah.
They're perfect words. Well, credit to you for acknowledging that, and I think it's great. You've got friends from both sides.
Do you?
I do, actually.
Yeah.
My parents.
Oh, that's a good one. Family's always tough.
Right, family's tough because, I've got brothers and we've had those political conversations. And I think I'm like you. I mean, I'm a moderate person who was raised Democrat, right? But I think when you get in this profession, you see what works and what doesn't work.
Right.
And you tend to lean more towards the right per se. But obviously I have a membership that swings left, swings right, in the middle. I would say I'm moderate to right? Yeah. And I'm comfortable saying that. And I've grown up that way. I remember when I first moved here and did the job. I was working with a partner at the time. I think the election was going on. It was Bush. And I was like, I think I'm going to vote for the Democrat. He said, what? And this guy had been on for a while, and so I was ostracized immediately.
Yeah.
But, as you evolve, you learn. So it's interesting. You mentioned just you gauge your political affiliations. I think that's what you kind of said, with the experience that you're given or you learn.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
So I really appreciate that. So that gets me into, the journalism conversation. You said you're not a journalist anymore. Why do you feel... I'll back up. My perception of journalism is that they are engaging in hyper-partisan politics with their coverage.
Yeah.
I just heard today that the Gallup just released a poll that for the first time ever, people are choosing not to consume media, and they don't trust, more often than not, mainstream journalism. So I think the experience you had with getting into that arena, earning the dollars to put food on your table, get a house, what have you, have a life, but then you start to see how your ideology evolves and then how you're limited in what you want to do.
Yeah.
And that job limits you. So you want to expand on that, like what you view the journalism being, where it's going.
Yeah.
Why is in the condition that it's in, and why are platforms such as the Undivided, why are they spawning in such a fast pace?
Ton of them. Well, I'll give a little context as to why I left my job, and I think it kind of answers the question. And it's not one thing. It wasn't like one moment, because I was as mainstream as journalists get. I spent 12 years as a mainstream journalist in Seattle, the first 3 years covering crime and justice for Cairo News Radio, the CBS radio affiliate. And then I just put more makeup on and did TV at Fox 13, and then transitioned into politics during the 2016 presidential election. And I was, moderating gubernatorial debates. I was doing I won an Emmy. I have like 9 Murrows. So I want to put that in context.
9 Murrows?
I've got 9. Yes, 9. I was thinking
pretty cool.
Thank you. But it's so funny Edward R. Murrow Awards, yes. It's so funny how the second I transition into commentary, people are like, she's a terrible journalist. It's like, actually, I think I was a pretty good journalist, So I was as mainstream comes. It's not like I felt out of my skin in that arena. And around the time the pandemic started, in fact, I was talking to my agent about looking to go to the network or one of the networks and deciding, where do I want to go from here? I feel like I've been in Seattle long enough.
You're talking national networks?
Like a national network, and kind of looking at what are the opportunities. But, there are a combination of things that led to my decision to walk away, and it really started in earnest during the pandemic. In my opinion, there was never a time built for a free press like that in our lifetime, where you have government at all levels that are exerting profound power over people's lives, local jurisdictions, county jurisdictions, state, federal. And it's like, this is the time for the free press to question every single thing that's happening. Now, I didn't believe that COVID was a hoax. I was a good girl. I got my vaccine. But when you have government officials who have declared states of emergency, who have near unilateral power to put someone out of work, to make health decisions that are going to keep people away from their dying loved ones, it's like the press has to question everything. And I found this environment where the media, and not everybody, but a lot of them, were just sort of accepting everything that came. Like, oh, this is an emergency. Let's just accept that what they're doing is appropriate. And I was really, really caught off guard by that.
The fact that nobody was questioning.
Well, it's like you can agree with it personally and want to be in a little turtle shell in your house, but you have to understand when I was in a situation, there's this, is it called Il Pisano? I'm going to give this great Italian restaurant in North Bend, a little free commercial.
We'll put a link in the description.
Yes, I expect a cut of your revenue. No, it's this awesome little Italian place in North Bend, and they've got like 6 tables, right? So they're not making money hand over fist there. And of course, they were shut down when everybody was shut down, but when we were allowed to go in with our masks, there's this table it's no bigger than this office, this restaurant. There's this table that's 3 feet into the door. And I've always found this table to be awkward, because it's like, you walk in and it's right there.
The cold air,
right?
The people hovering over your table.
So we had to wear our masks to walk in and get seated at that table that was 3 feet into the restaurant, and then take them off to eat. And it's like, for the love of God, journalists, you have to question the sense in that.
It's devoid of common sense.
Like, I know we're not doctors, but let's use our noggins, right? So it's things like that. And we had anchors who, and I won't name names, but I was sending a lot of emails to our team during the pandemic saying, please stop telling people to get the vaccine. Please stop shaming people on air about getting the vaccine.
Did that cause you, I'm going to interrupt, did that cause you problems internally?
No. I like to think that I had a lot of respect in the newsroom for my journalistic integrity. And basically what I told him is, offer people the best available advice. Don't tell people not to get it, but we're not doctors. And it's going to turn people off, and it's not our role. Tell people what the doctors are saying, what the health department is saying, but we'd have anchors who would, kind of riff and be like, I don't understand why people don't want to get it. It's easy. It takes a second. It's, and it's like, that's just, it gave me weird vibes. And so I was sending a lot of emails like that. So my disappointment in the direction of mainstream media really started in earnest during the pandemic and then just intensified in the summer of 2020.
Sure.
The horrible coverage of the riots. I mean, everything I went through during those, my security guard disarming rioters of stolen police rifles.
That made international news.
He was a stud, and I cowered behind a potted plant while he did it. I'm not afraid to admit that. I was on the phone to 911.
Well, that's his job, right?
I called 911 too. I was on the phone because this guy shot one of the rifles back into a police car, and I was obviously I'm like, well, now I have to call 911,
sure.
And now we have these rifles, and he's taking them apart. But anyway, and then our crew getting mobbed and chopped.
I remember that.
And the thing about that is
that was scary.
It was terrifying. If you've watched the live video, you can hear me crying at the end, and I don't cry easily. It was a terrifying experience, and one of the things that bothered me after that is none of the mainstream media stuck up for us. And it's like I had at every opportunity when Trump supporters assaulted the media, when they knocked over their cameras and things across the country, I'd say something about it. Every time a journalist was assaulted and I found out about it, I'd always say something about it. And it was like they either didn't want to vilify this crowd, peaceful protesters, who had just done this to us, or they didn't want to stand up for a blonde white lady who worked for Fox, who they didn't like, who they thought was on the right. And I was so disgusted by that it was like I realized that I didn't belong anymore.
Yeah, you felt out of the group.
I did. And it's like I've been morally consistent every time and stuck up for all of you when these things have happened. And it's like there was a few who sent out tweets, but no news coverage of it. And there had been a Trump anti-lockdown protester who pepper sprayed reporters down in Olympia. Every station did a story about that, as they should. And it's like, but then silence when we were mobbed for 30 minutes and had to seek refuge in a fire station. At one point on that video, you can hear me telling the protester, the girl who's screaming in my face, that I'm pregnant. I wasn't, but I was thinking at that time I had a 24-year-old photographer.
Smart move.
I was like, let me just make up that I'm pregnant, so hopefully they leave us alone. And they didn't. It made no difference. And in fact, later on, they called me a liar on social media for daring to lie about being pregnant while I was in this terrible situation. So it's just, I started to realize I felt kind of on the outside. And then there were some other weird things that happened. Fox management took over, and we were so short-staffed, as newsrooms were, across the country. And this was in the fall of 2021. And they put the Divide on a hiatus, which was fine. I kind of looked at it as a vacation. I wasn't happy about it, but I was promised it was going to come back.
Is it because they you couldn't have enough people to produce your show?
Well, so they did it to Washington's Most Wanted and The Divide because they only had enough staff to do the newscasts.
Okay.
Like we were, and I do not disagree with that. We were so
it's a management
short-staffed.
Decision.
We'd lost like 20 newsroom employees during the pandemic, which is a ton in local news. And so we were having trouble just doing the newscasts that we had to do. So they were like, anything that's not the newscasts, we're giving a hiatus to. So that was The Divide and Washington's Most Wanted, and people lost it. I mean, they got so many emails. And so one day they said, hey, we want to bring the show back. We made an announcement it was coming back. And then because of some disagreements I had with them about changes they wanted to make to the show got canceled, and we weren't going to go forward because I wasn't comfortable with the changes. I kind of had it out with them about it, and the show wasn't going to go forward. And that's when I realized, you know what? To do what I think I need to do to accomplish the mission I think I want to accomplish, which is trying to bring common sense back into the media and to politics, I might be better off just doing this by myself. So I spent the next month, convincing my agent that it was fine, because I quit right after the election, and convincing my boyfriend at the time, now fiance, and he was so great.
Congratulations.
He's like, thank you. He was so great. He's like, if this flops, I've got you. We'll be fine. So it was really this kind of just coming to terms with the fact that, because I've been public about this, because I don't work there anymore, that I made great money at Fox, probably more than 99% of TV people in the market. And, that was hard to walk away from. I mean, I grew up poor. And so the fact that I was making like $200,000 in TV was like, in local TV.
It's significant.
It's significant. I realized that, but I worked hard for that. I worked like 80 hours a week. And so leaving that, the decision to leave that and to try this independent podcast was terrifying. But it felt like to me, if I believe in the mission that we've been trying to achieve for the last 6 years through The Divide, I don't think I can continue it here in this current environment. And so we made that decision and launched it's actually coming up on a year, and I don't regret it for a second.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
I think it shows leadership and the courage. Not many people have the courage to leave a well-paying job.
Yeah.
And then maybe suppress their morals to just keep on getting that paycheck. I mean,
Yeah.
to me, that shows leadership. And I have a lot of admiration for you. So thank you for doing that. I mean, it's pretty cool. If we all could take some of that, I think, guidance, maybe we'd be better off.
When I laugh at, Nicole Thomas Kennedy and the sort of very far left bloggers in town call it a grift, that I'm running a grift with the Undivided podcast. It's like, that's the worst grift ever, to leave a job for less money and more work. What exactly is the grift side of that? Because I haven't figured it out yet.
That's the unreasonable activist mindset that
isn't
just
crazy?
Is devoid of common sense.
You know what's funny about that is, and I've never said this publicly, but during the pandemic, I made one-time donations to some of my biggest hater bloggers. To the Erica C. Barnett blog.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
To the Capitol Hill, what's the Capitol Hill blog? That's what it's called?
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
And a couple others, because I believe, as much as they're nasty to me, I believe that diversity of thought in the media is an awesome thing. I really do. And so I made those little, one-time donations to them and some other media organizations, because I knew, even I was at Fox at the time, how hard it must be as an independent journalist to be working during the pandemic and relying on that. And so I just laugh when it's like, I appreciate the work. I don't call what they do a grift. I think that some of the work they do is very damaging to the state of Seattle. I think it's very far left, but I don't call their work a grift. In fact, I supported it financially.
Well, I think that's great, but it's freedom of speech. It's why we have the country that we have. But those types of people are the ones that want to cancel your mindset, your view on it.
And you know why? They see it catching on. And I love this. They are so terrified about losing. And also, they don't have any folks on the left in Seattle who are really, how do I put this? Who really are personalities that people gravitate to. I think it bothers them. Yeah. And you have, a media ecosystem that is flush with progressive voices, but you only have a few voices that the right really trust. And so naturally, they're going to become a little more prominent, and it bothers the hell out of the other ones.
I had never heard anybody analyze it that way. I would actually agree with you on that.
That's the only way that you can explain that level of jealousy. Erica Barnett was taking shots at me today because one of the sponsors of our podcast is an organization called Future 42, which I announced publicly. We put out this big video because I do commentary now. I work for myself. Sure. I can have any sponsor that I want. It doesn't bother me. Now, would I have that sponsor if I was in mainstream media? Of course not. I wouldn't have a political organization sponsor my podcast, but the organization and I are very aligned in our mission and our value set, and so we're teaming up to try to bring common sense back to the state of Washington. I love it. But of course, the Erica Barnett types, they want to paint it as dark right-wing money.
Of course.
And it's like, if that was dark right-wing money, if I was being funded by dark right-wing money, I wouldn't tweet about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so it just cracks me up, just the level of anger they have that the podcast is doing well. And, Erica's, what is her blog called? Publicola. We tripled her number of subscribers on Patreon in the first week. And I'm sure that hurts a little bit, but it shows that common sense sells better than the right-wing blind hatred. And the sooner they learn that, maybe they can do a little bit better in their endeavors.
Well, it's classic, and then we'll put the link here, is that, you engage in a Twitter battle with NTK yesterday or on the 17th. It's leaving my job for less money and more work equals worst grift ever.
It does.
Awesome.
It does.
Gosh, you're just trolling them. Yeah. Go back to losing elections, NTK. You're better than that. Better at that. Well, it's great because you're putting the energy that they try to hit your character with back on them. It's like you're not gonna cower with these people.
Well, and that's when I go back to our conversation at the beginning. Is the common sense middle has to be brave, and they have to try to be louder than the fringes. And the Seattle City Council meetings are a good example. You had Shama Sawant's posse of 30 people packing the meetings with their signs, signing up for testimony so they were the only voice heard when they represent such a small fraction of the city's electorate. But they're the ones who can go to a city council meeting in the middle of the day on a weekday.
No job.
And I don't know if they have no job, but they have certainly more flexibility in their job. And so, that's then it becomes this just never-ending echo chamber that leads to some of these disastrous policies. Sure. There's no backstop for bad ideas. And so I get people all the time saying, don't dive in the mud with the likes of, NTK. And I'm like, hell no, I am absolutely going to get in the mud because I'm going to be the voice for all the regular people who have jobs and families who don't want to get in the mud because they can't risk it. I can risk it. And I'll get in the mud with them every single day for the rest of my life if I have to.
Well, number one, it's fun.
Yeah.
It is. And
mud wrestling. Everybody loves mud wrestling.
It's movie Stripes. Great movie.
I don't know if anybody would pay to watch NTK and I mud wrestle. I think we're getting a little off the rails.
Politics to moderate to mud wrestling. Hold the line.
Oh.
That's good. But no, I credit, because I have a Twitter handle, but I stopped tweeting. I'm just like, this is a cesspool.
It's so bad.
It's so bad. But I love engaging with these people. But to what end? I think, but you do have to, the ones that are kind of built up by their crowd as being their voice, you have to engage with them because you have to show them how devoid of reason they are.
Well, you have to take away the power of their labels too, and I think that's really what I'm trying to do. Once their labels don't work and don't bother people, they genuinely have nothing. So the reason that all
it's
this
cancel culture too.
Yeah.
If you don't agree to get canceled, you won't be canceled.
Right. And the reason all this latest Twitter kerfuffle started is on this past week, I had a dinner, a formal, nice dinner in Bellevue with some of the people who helped to support the podcast at the beginning. We have something called a presidential patron, and it's like $250 a month. And so we took some of them out, and also some folks who have just been like my sister came up from Miami, and she's been working behind the scenes, just helping me with everything. And so I took them out for a nice dinner just to thank them and talk about the direction of the show and where we're going to go from here. And I tweeted out a picture of it. And this was like this honest moment of gratitude for me because it's hard to describe the feeling when, you take a leap and strangers catch you. Like that is the best feeling I've ever had in my life.
Because they believe in you.
Because they say, I'm going to take a risk on you. I'm going to give you my hard-earned money, whether it's $5 a month or $250 a month. And I believe in the mission. And so this was a post about gratitude. And I posted a picture of all of us at dinner. And immediately the Twitter storm was, everybody in the picture except one person's white. And so immediately it became that I was like, that it's a podcast for white people, that I'm racist.
Sure.
And so that's why I told NTK, your labels don't work on me. This is like, and so that's where this whole thing started. And it just shows the ridiculousness, right? That I can't show gratitude for a handful of people who subscribe to my podcast, who've helped me in this huge journey in life without being racist. And it's like, okay, if we can't just say that those labels don't mean anything, then where are we going to get? So I'm not going to kowtow to that. And I always tell my sponsors too, is like, if you want to be a sponsor on the podcast, your skin has to be thick, because they will come after you 100%.
It's fantastic. I love that mindset. Do you feel as if social media reflects society?
No, of course not. No, absolutely not. And in fact, I started my podcast on Wednesday. We do a subscriber-only podcast on Wednesdays by telling people, if you haven't joined Twitter, don't do it. It doesn't help with anything. I mean, I'm kind of stuck on it because of my job. No, it's not a reflection of society in the slightest.
Is it a form of journalism?
Yes, to a certain extent.
Journalists do take whatever they see on Twitter and
right. I think that
throw it out on media.
Well, if you've got the president of the United States who's speaking directly to the American people on Twitter, that's just as good as words coming out of his mouth. And so I think to use social media as part of your reporting on a story is totally legitimate. And I think Twitter is a really great way to get breaking news out there. That kind of became the immediate, put it on Twitter and then you broke the story and then kind of get the story ready and put it online. Gotcha. So I think Twitter has a lot of uses that are productive, but I think it's been overshadowed really by just the vitriol, the half-truths, the abbreviated context. Sure. It's not, look how Jonathan Choe is using Twitter. Very effectively.
Very
I think
effective.
Jonathan Choe single-handedly ended that homelessness complex in the CID.
Absolutely, and that's one of the things I was going to ask
Yeah.
you about. It's the CID mega complex.
Yeah.
And we had Choe on here a couple podcasts ago. I hated Jonathan Choe.
Oh, please do tell.
Because I think, and he knows this.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. I can't believe I missed that podcast because I've watched some of yours, but I didn't catch that one. Okay, I have to go back and watch.
Because he was part of that corporate local media agenda to a degree. And, as you know, the mob came to my house, and about 85 of them protesting. And Choe was the only one who did a news coverage on it and went to my neighborhood and started talking to my neighbors. I'm like, all right, now you're making
see.
it personal.
Yeah.
So I stopped working with him. But he and I developed a relationship post, and I think he's one of the best journalists out there. And so I have a lot of admiration for him now.
Yeah.
So I switched because it became less personal about me. And I could see in the conversation we had earlier, there's a role that journalists play.
Yeah.
Right? You have to just get it out there, regardless of your personal bias. That's what makes you a professional journalist.
Right.
Right? So I try to remove my bias of my observation of those tactics to see that it's just a job.
Right. Well, and also there's a difference between liking a reporter and respecting a reporter. I don't really know that anyone in a position like yours should like a reporter, but even if they do negative stories or they do hard stories, you can still respect them. I mean,
Absolutely.
Your officers have done some things that I've blasted them for, and I won't call anybody out specifically, but there was, a truck bush incident that I wasn't too fond of. And there have been other things over the years. And so, because I believe, that officers should be held to the highest possible standard that we can hold them to. They have the power of life and death over people. But there's a difference between vilifying them wholesale and expecting them to be held accountable. And so with journalists like Jonathan Choe, I think you can dislike him but still respect him.
Yeah.
And still admire don't get me wrong, he is an acquired taste. He has a very in-your-face style that is off-putting for a lot of people.
Sure it is.
But I've become close with Jonathan Choe since he left, and we talk often, and I've had him on the podcast several times. But I don't see how anyone can look at what he's putting out, the actual content he's putting out, and claim that he's not a journalist.
It's spot on.
It's
and I think
insane.
I think your takeaway with I don't want to say single-handedly, but he had a profound impact on getting that mega complex out of the CID, where he was smart. He went right into the Asian community, connected with the elders, talked with community members there. And to me, it's so stunning that you have a politician, Dow Constantine, who wouldn't engage in dialogue. And then Choe captures it and shows the utter hypocrisy. And now what's happened? Dow has to walk it all back.
Yeah.
And that's pure journalism.
That is.
And that's what it's all about.
And Jonathan wasn't advocating for the homelessness complex to have the kibosh put on it. He was asking Dow Constantine and his staff, why not? This is their concern. They'd feel like they weren't consulted. That's the job of a journalist. And one of the other things, one of my favorite quotes of stuff that Jonathan got down there is from an Asian American elder who are like, they want to come here and do photo ops and use us, the Asian American community, to try to get elected. And then when we have a real concern, where are they?
They're gone.
They're nowhere. And so, there's a couple things on this I just have to touch on.
Go.
You have Jonathan Choe, who's an Asian American journalist, raising awareness for concerns of Seattle's Asian American community, a community we're supposed to believe that the progressives in the city care deeply about. Jonathan Choe is vilified every single step of the way. He's at a press conference, tries to ask about it politely. Dow Constantine runs out of the room. Jonathan Choe chases him. Dow Constantine calls him not a journalist and flees down a private elevator.
That's stunning.
It's stunning. And then they block him from coming into this press tour. And when they block him, they say, you were supposed to RSVP 24 hours ago. And he says, you didn't send me the press release to RSVP. And so he's blocked from going into this, all for trying to communicate the concerns of the Asian American community, a community that people like Dow Constantine claim to care about.
Doing his job.
It's insane to me. And then, to top it all off, cherry on the top of the cake. Is that the phrase? Cherry on the top of the sundae?
Well,
I'll take a
like
cherry
old
on
fashions.
anything.
I'll do a cherry,
cherry
in
the old fashioned. Tammy Morales, Councilwoman Tammy Morales, who's up for re-election next year, She puts out this statement. They were holding signs in the Chinatown International District with her face with a big red X around it, saying, not welcome here. These are her constituents. She wasn't listening to them either. And then when Dow Constantine walks back the homelessness complex, Tammy Morales comes out with this woke word-laden press release saying that, she understands that the community has concerns. She does wish the homelessness complex could proceed, but she understands they had concerns. And then she has the audacity to blame Jonathan Choe for co-opting organic neighborhood resistance. Councilwoman, you weren't there listening to them.
Right.
So you're going to blame the Asian American journalist who was the only one who'd go down there and listen to them because you wouldn't as their council member? The level of gaslighting.
It's incredible.
It is extraordinary. And I think the fact that you don't have mainstream journalists who are willing to look at that and say, wait a second, Councilwoman, they're mad at you.
Right.
How are you now pointing the finger at Jonathan Choe? And the other thing is, and I have come out no holds bar against the mainstream media. I am like persona non grata with the mainstream media now because their lack of any sort of pushback against what Dow Constantine is doing to Jonathan Choe is dangerous. I mean, to think that you wouldn't see the slippery slope of Dow Constantine deeming this person a journalist and that person not, and saying you're not allowed at these press events, I'm not going to answer your questions. If that were a Republican elected official doing that to some alt blogger, every outlet in the city would report on it.
Come after him.
You can't have politicians. Now, do I believe that media availabilities have to be free-for-alls? No, I don't want a bunch of citizens in there with their cell phones just screaming. It's counterproductive to what journalists are there to do, which is gather information for the public. But Jonathan Choe, by any measure, is a journalist. He's working as a fellow for, yes, Discovery Institute, but an arm of them that's specifically aimed at homelessness content.
Yeah.
So I have spoken up for Jonathan Choe every step of the way. And by the way, when the media was kept out of a public safety meeting in Greenwood the other day, I don't know if you saw that, it was wild. They just shut the media out. You know who they shut out? KUOW, King
Public
5.
radio?
King 5. They shut out mainstream outlets, some of the furthest to the left outlets in the city. And you know what I did? I stood up for them immediately. Because to me, it doesn't matter if you're the stranger or if you're Jonathan Choe. And that's the slippery slope I'm talking about. Is if you think that you can ignore what's happening to Jonathan Choe and that ultimately it won't have some sort of impact on you, you are fooling yourself. And it's so disappointing to me to see the media take sides like that, similarly to what they did to us when our crew got mobbed at Choe.
Absolutely. And, Jonathan, I've been in conversation with Jonathan, and Jonathan brought me into this situation with the CID, and I went to that rally,
Saw you there,
walked
yeah.
to City Hall. And to your point, there's no other media outlet that's highlighting what Dow did here. The fact that you do not communicate with just a historic community in the city that I think is the pulse of the city to a degree, it is stunning. And so, we put this out yesterday, and we'll put a link in the description. It's about a minute video, but it just throwing some shade at Dow. We'll go through in just a minute.
I like the music.
So basically just highlighting Dow, using some of the media coverage in terms of headlines about the protests, but more so the fact that the CID did their job along with Choe and ultimately got this thing shut down. And I think that's the story.
Well, this is a
Dow
guy.
had to walk it back.
This is a guy who wants to be governor.
Yeah, it's
If not for any other reason, you want to be governor someday. It's very clear. The media should make him justify that, and they should have stood up for Jonathan Choe in that room and said, "Hey, no, that's a legitimate question he's asking. Answer it." But of course, they're not going to.
But they don't want to cover for him because are they trying to protect just the mainstream media's position and not go to independent journalists like Choe?
No, because they don't like him, because they think he's on the right. That's all it is. It's political.
Got it.
Because there are a ton of our media
agree with you.
ecosystem in Seattle has always been robust. it has always included independent journalists, bloggers, podcasters, the stranger, and that's been normal. It's not like we have some system where it's only the main TV reporters that are in the room in the Seattle Times. It's always been robust. So if their issue was they don't want to lose their standing, their position, the two people who were in that room, that press conference where Dow fled down an elevator, were Erica Barnett and Omari Salisbury, two independent journalists. And so they should know better than anyone the position.
I did not know that.
Two independent journalists who share their opinion and who have opinions on the left.
But yeah, they label John as not a journalist. John is not a journalist.
And Jonathan is the one who is called not a journalist. And he's sitting in the room with those two people. And I don't have any problem with Omari Salisbury has done some good work.
Yeah, he does.
And even Erica Barnett, for as much as she and I beef, she has some well-researched articles. I don't agree with the leaning of them, but I consider her a journalist. And so it's wild to me. I also know quickly, just so my words aren't misconstrued, on the homelessness complex. I have toured that Salvation Army facility. I think it's a wonderful model for what we should be doing for homeless individuals who are finally willing to take that step into sobriety, into some sort of housing. We have to put a shelter somewhere. We have to have shelter space somewhere. We need more shelter space in the city. So I don't think there's people twisting this as, the NIMBYs just don't want to shelter anywhere. That was never the argument of the CID. They just wanted to have a voice.
A voice. That was the problem.
They wanted to know that the police department and the county had a plan for what would be probably an increase in criminal activity.
You are correct to saying that because the data shows that.
Well, exactly. And even Councilman Andrew Lewis has acknowledged the data that shows that, I think it was in 2021 or 2020, of all the shootings in the city, of all the reasons people get shot, domestic violence, gang violence, the largest percentage had some sort of tie to homelessness.
Homeless encampments.
Sometimes the homeless individuals were a victim, but you can't deny the tie.
Right.
And so it's a reasonable concern, and it's reasonable to want input.
You were absolutely correct, and we don't have the resources right now. We've been defunded, so we got 500 people gone and counting. It's a serious problem.
Is it 500 now?
It's close to 500. I always say 500 because that's a huge number. But we're literally we put it out every week with the public safety index that we put out there, but we're close to 500.
Wow.
And the fact that we have over 300 now that are eligible to retire.
That's terrifying.
It's terrifying.
What's the incentive to stay?
Well, and that's it. What's the incentive? And we're like, when we have council members like Sawant always calling us right wing people, and I use her as an example. She's in the news now where somebody was tragically, and I think it's a problem, throwing human feces in her yard.
Yeah, that's awful.
Right? Yeah, like who does that?
First of all, that's just gross. But second, that's awful.
But she goes to the media and says, that we didn't do the investigation. So I've got some inside knowledge, but obviously I can't share.
And it's like,
right? But we actually did investigate it. Like, went above and beyond.
Yeah.
That's the words that I got. Above and beyond to look into this.
Right.
But when you're dealing with assaults, robberies, rapes, crimes out of control, are we going to put do we have the resources to put somebody on this case 24 hours a day, 7 days a week?
And
because
would you if it was a normal person?
Exactly. That's the whole point. But she continues to malign and besmirch us. Why do you think people leave this city as police officers? What incentive is it? Because we're no longer the highest paid.
Who is? Port of Seattle?
I think locally now, I think it's probably Kent, I think.
Kent's
I got to look at
paying
the
them
numbers.
higher than Seattle?
Well,
I got to talk to Mayor Dana Ralph and see where they're getting that money from.
Oh, I know that Clark County just did a 25% 4-year contract. They weren't even without a contract. King County, obviously, I think the council there still needs to vote on it, but their membership overwhelmingly approved it. They're getting 20% for 3 years. But my point is, the homeless encampments, the crime is out of control there. I don't see an end to this, and I think it's why Dow is unwilling to face the music when it comes to the threat towards the money base, which is the homeless industrial complex. And then why isn't local media covering what he's doing and not engaging with community to put a mega complex in there?
Yeah.
It's crazy to me.
It is crazy.
It's crazy.
And a couple of things, the Sawant, her supporters should even be angered by that. She wanted to dismantle the police, not just defund, dismantle. And now she's asking for special treatment from the police. And I think that her case should be investigated the same when somebody was sending her awful threats to her email. Absolutely. But she needs to realize that, because in that case, that was terrifying, I think, for her and her family, and I feel terrible for them. But she needs to realize she's robbing that same level of justice from other victims of crimes because of her words and her actions. Lisa Herbold with the RV that came into her house, and she's calling up, Carmen Best at the time, like, what do I do?
Can you handle this?
It's like, you're the one who wanted to defund the police. But, it goes to this, I think, larger, and the elections in 2023, and thank God, right? Because you're going to have someone like Lisa Herbold, who ran in 2019 saying at your guys' forum that she wanted to hire more police officers, turned around 6 months later, said we're going to defund by 50%, came out 2 months after that and said, oh, we were wrong. And now in 2023, leading up to that election, she's talking about helping Bruce Harrell hire more officers. It's
incredible.
It's mind-numbing. It's spinning. And if the media doesn't pin her to that narrative, they're abdicating their duties 100%.
100% agree with you.
It's insane. And I'll say about the defunding thing, whenever I bring up police defunding, the little Twitter troll activists are like, well, they didn't actually follow through with defunding. I mean, they did cut some, but they didn't do 50%. And I said, but you don't understand. It's defunding via their words. Why would anyone work for a boss that hates them? Why would anyone work for a city council that openly hates them? Nobody would tolerate that environment. And you're talking about now, throwing, $10,000 at them to stay or whatever. Their lives and their dignity and their pride aren't worth $10,000 or even $20,000 or $30,000. It's like, why would any of them stay? You're giving them no incentive. You have city council members who, depending on the flavor of the month, either vilify them or love them. And those are your bosses. You look at that as any person in any position. If you worked at a freaking coffee shop and you had a boss that was calling you, racist, or, calling for your accountability for honest mistakes, you wouldn't stay there. That's insane to me. So I just don't, they did defund. They defunded via decimation, via their words.
Yeah, you said it better than I could ever say it. So thank you for that. Last point.
Yes.
Two more points. Who are the moderate thought leaders left in Seattle? Are there any?
Well, us.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think Bruce Harrell is on the right path. I think he's saying the right things. I think he has stopped caring what fringe individuals want him to do. I mean, what the words that were leaked of what he said to, I think it was East Precinct officers in a roll call, or was it West?
It was West Precinct.
Yeah. And then he didn't deny them. So I think he has what it takes to, and I think he's given more leeway as a black man and as someone who has grown up in the community and who has great community ties. I think he has a little more leeway to reject outright those angry white 30 people who show up at council meetings and scream and yell. So I think Bruce Harrell is one of them. In the media, I think the Seattle Times Ed Board has had its moments of clarity, which I've appreciated.
It's interesting because we were the first to endorse Jim Farrell. We had a press conference, invited media, and then we just did another press conference mid-September. Now the Times is endorsing.
Yeah,
Farrell.
he got the Times endorsement.
So it's like you're talking about public safety. There's some shift. There's alignment here in terms of the conversation wrapped around public safety.
Yeah. And I wish there was just a couple more in the mainstream media, reporters who I really felt like understood, who I really felt like were willing to, I can't think of any in the mainstream. Can you? King, Cairo, Como. I like Hannah Kim.
I think.
Are you not giving? I like Hannah Kim at Fox 13.
I would agree with you there.
I like Hannah. I've always known her. She was my seatmate. I've always known her to be straightforward, and she asks tough. She grilled Nicole Thomas Kennedy about her tweets, and I loved it. So Hannah's good.
Okay.
Yeah.
But there's been such a rollover of staff too.
It's a bunch of young people, don't know the city. So I think, who the moderate thought leaders are? People who are in the city, working hard, who want to be safe, business leaders like Olga Sagan with Piroshki, who has put herself out there to speak up and say something and been vilified as a result. I think those are the thought leaders, the people who are finally starting to say, you know what, come what may, angry Twitter people be damned. I'm going to say something because I love the city and I want it to be better.
If there's one thing that SPOG could do better, what would it be in terms of policing in general, communication? What would it be? Well,
I think communication's always a key. The more communication, the better from my perspective. You know, it's hard to say without knowing what cases you guys have going on. I mean, I tend to not be a fan, and I think this is probably out of your control. Maybe you can correct me on where things are at. I tend to not be a fan of firings being reversed in some cases. I know there's been some of those in instances where I just felt like they should not have been reversed, but that's, you know, I think there's some legalese involved there that I might not understand. But no, I mean, I think that you have taken a very strong position.
We've been very outspoken.
And honestly,
it's a tough position to be in because we have to try to get a contract and we have to have the council vote on it, right?
Well,
so it's like, how do you balance that?
Here's the thing. They're going to hate you no matter what. Mm-hmm. And that's what you kind of have to realize. I've been to this building many times over the years. I've had conversations with many people who have sat in your position.
Sure.
And all of them have been about this fight with the city and this vilification.
All the time.
And you're never going to get away from that. So you have to decide the same with everyone who's watching and listening. You have to decide, are you going to sit back and take it? Or are you going to just move forward and stand up for what you believe in?
I like that. Well, you're doing great, phenomenal work. You covered the reform laws having to be reformed themselves. And that's a moderate stance to have.
Yeah.
And I got a lot of respect for you, and I appreciate your time. You've always been fair. And how can people find you? How can they support you?
Oh, I like this question. So if you want to support the podcast, because we are people powered, even though on the internet people say we're funded by right-wing dark money, we're funded by subscribers who pay $5 a month to watch it or listen to the podcast. We do 3 podcasts a week.
3 a week. That's a lot of content.
And one of them is exclusive to subscribers on Wednesdays. So that's kind of the bonus. And I also do a live Q&A with subscribers every single month. So if you want to subscribe, you can do that at patreon.com/undivided. That's patreon.com/undivided.
Well, perfect. Brandi Kruse, thanks so much for being here.
It was great to be here. Pleasure.
And hey, let's support Brandi, please. Help her out because she is absolutely leading with courage, and she's willing to put her bottom line on the line in terms of the money and speaking out for truth, moderate conversations that are full of common sense discussion. And again, I can't thank you enough for what you've done. You've allowed me to critically think myself over the years, and I learned from you. So if we can all just learn with each other, and then we can all just continue to hold the line and get back to common sense society conversations.
I like it.
Thanks, Brandi.
Yep.
Take care, everybody.
That was great.